Good afternoon and welcome to CARW's first membership meeting. Thank you to Landmark Credit Union and all of our sponsors for today's event and for their support of CARW. With several Wisconsin projects in various phases of development, a common topic of discussion is the commercial repositioning of office projects. So we've invited an esteemed panel and a very special guest to discuss with us today. The conversion is not as simple as some might suggest. CARW is pleased to welcome Stephen Painter, who is widely recognized as an industry leader and an invaluable resource for market expertise to developers, landlords, and tenants alike. He is frequently called on to provide thought leadership and regularly speaks on topics such as unlocking the value in Class B and C buildings by converting them to residential, shaping the future of cities, and design of post-pandemic office buildings. Engaged in research, he has led the development of a tool for the rapid assessment of existing building stock for ESG performance, and he was recognized by Business Insider as one of the top 100 people transforming business in 2022. As an aside, I think it's interesting to note that his firm, Gensler, was also recently awarded participation as the national architect for the revisioning of the Summerfest grounds. Stephen has been featured on PBS, BBC News, CNBC, Daily UK Mail, Canadian Press, The Globe, Toronto Star, Architectural Record, and many others. I've personally enjoyed many calls with Stephen preparing for this presentation, and I'm excited to be a participant in today's membership meeting to learn even more. We'll welcome Stephen to the stage, followed by panelists including local members and developers who have actually completed projects or in the process of doing so. So with that, Stephen, thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, firstly, I wanted to start by thanking everyone for welcoming me here and inviting me here today. It's exciting. I've been kind of doing similar talks to this all over the country and across Canada recently. But I got to say, this is the prettiest room that I've ever done a speech in. So thanks for that. I was staying at the Pfister Hotel last night too as well. So my assumption is that all of Milwaukee is this beautiful. And I'm not going to go anywhere else to prove that wrong. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is what we call vacancy to vibrancy. And as Kevin said in the intro, it's really about getting the highest and best use of all of the assets that we have in our downtowns so that we can bring people there, we can encourage people back, and start to solve some of the problems that we've been seeing in cities post-COVID. So this is work we've been doing with developers. It's been work we've been doing with cities as well, and federal government, everyone in between. But the focus is really on where are the people and what are they doing? How can we encourage them to be there? So we actually started this at the end of 2019. So if anyone can remember that far back, everyone was saying there's going to be a huge recession coming. It's going to be a real problem. So we started looking at buildings and what we could do, speaking to clients and saying, hey, what are you worried about if there's a recession? Of course, we didn't know that recession was going to come with a global pandemic at the time. But we still started preparing. And one of the things that all of the developers we spoke to were worried about was their lower class office buildings that were kind of becoming obsolete. It was the stuff that was built in the 60s and the 70s that was coming up to 50 years, and they didn't really know what its next life was. Did they reinvest massively on the engineering, or did they change the use? Fast forward 6 months and into COVID, and it very, very quickly became obvious that there was a major problem. In April of 2020, we were approached by a lot of developers asking us to look at projects, to look at buildings. And I hate doing the same thing twice. So I was like, I think I can develop a system that can just do this for me. But why were we doing it? Well, by the middle of COVID or towards the end of COVID, vacancy had shot up 10% in most cities. It's now up to about 20% across the US on average. But the reason I use these numbers is that even in 2022, vacancy in almost every US city was worse than it was in Detroit when the city declared bankruptcy. So not only is it an impact on what's happening in our downtowns and the people in our downtowns, it's a huge impact on the tax revenue that the cities are able to get. Now, we haven't seen other cities go bankrupt yet, but in the cities I've been working with, it's a serious concern. They're not getting the real estate tax, and they're starting to look more and more like Detroit. So what does that look like in a typical city? I'm using Toronto because I'm from Toronto. But what we're actually seeing is a bifurcation of the market. Class C office buildings kind of doing okay because they're cheap. And some of the trophy class buildings and Class A buildings starting to do better because people are starting to find them desirable again. But it's really the Class B and some of those older Class C stuff that's struggling. The numbers for Milwaukee are actually relatively similar to Toronto. You're seeing just under or around 15% vacancy, which is pretty good. I mean, it probably sounds terrible and is bad for some of you in the room, but it's above or below the average for the nation. But that split is starting to happen. And then the other thing we're seeing, I know this is kind of small, so if you're at the back, you probably can't read it, but we're starting to see defaults happening. And that's opening up a lot of opportunities. A lot of the developers we're working with are going in, they're buying buildings that are defaulted, they're buying buildings that are at risk. So we're helping to identify that. And with the information that was recently added onto CoStar, you can actually see it. So we're looking at buildings now, and almost every one that we're doing a conversion on has these three main kind of what we call red flags when we look at the CMBS data. And this one is a project actually from Chicago that we're working on. So you can see in the top right, the NOI is about 8 million. The debt service is 12.8 million. So they're losing pretty serious money. That's an obvious red flag, not being able to cover the payments. They're seeing an origination balance which is higher, a current balance which is higher than the origination balance with no extra work having been done. And we're seeing that the interest rate is a hell of a lot lower than they'd be able to get now if they could refinance it. So these buildings we're helping multifamily developers mostly identify them, test them to see if they're going to be a good conversion candidate, and then go in and make an offer on them. But across the country, about 20% of all of the CMBS loans are heading to default. And this is actually a slightly old number from JP Morgan. It's somewhere around 60 billion now they're predicting by the end of the year of amount of money lost as buildings go into default. And you're seeing some real extreme cases. 80% drop in value is not unusual. But there's buildings in New York where Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, which is a client of ours, sold their stake in it for $1. And it was 500,000 square foot building. They owned half. They sold it for $1 to get out of the liabilities they had on it. So again, bad news, but it's opening up opportunities, and we're now doing conversions on projects like that to really bring new value to them. So what did we figure out? Well, it became apparent that we could not tackle a problem of this scale by doing one building at a time. And that was the traditional approach. Client would come to us, we start designing the building, we'd spend 3 to 6 months on it, we'd spend lots of their money, which was nice. And at the end, they would say, financials didn't work. And then they would never hire us again because they were pissed off that we'd spent all of their money and not got them to an answer. So we needed a quicker approach. And to do that, we started looking at what makes a conversion work and what makes it not work. And not just for residential, but for all of the different types of repositioning that we were looking at. And it really came down to these 5 main things. Where is the building? Do people want to live there? Kind of obvious. What form does the building take? Is that going to be able to lay out well? How does the floor plate work? Is that going to be suitable for units? And so on. With these 5 main things, we then weighted them, which is the percentages you're seeing underneath, to how much they impacted the business model. And then we broke it down into about 150 characteristics that we study and measure. But what this allowed us to do was start turning what was a design problem into a data problem. We started looking at what data we could get from leasing packages or from CoStar or from the owners, and how we could crunch that through and compare it to an ideal conversion. So as an example, taking the floor plate of the building. Now, this is one of the key factors, weighted at 30%. But do we need to sit and design it? Well, not really. We put in the data for the floor plate size, the quarter window depth, the number of sides that have windows, and the algorithm starts to say, okay, in your market, we want about an average of a 600 square foot unit. Well, you've got 50 feet quarter window, so that unit's going to have 12 feet wide and 50 feet long, and it's going to suck. It's not a good building. By contrast, if it's 35 feet, maybe we have a 5-foot corridor, a 30 by 20 unit, and all of a sudden it's starting to seem reasonable, it's starting to look good, and that's going to score better. Of course, once it knows the size and proportion of the average unit, it can figure out how many are on the floor, can figure out roughly what your floor plate efficiency is, how many units you get in the building. Once it knows how many units, it can tell if you have enough elevators, if you have enough parking, depending on your market and stuff as well. So it really started quickly breaking down that design problem, that physical piece of real estate, into data that we could use. So it cuts out the legwork. Effectively, what we're doing is breaking that office building down and then comparing it to the perfect residential building. And that generates a gap. Your office building looks like this, the perfect residential building looks like that. There's a gap between there, and that gap has a value or a cost. So things can be weighted positively. You got a perfect floor plate, great. And then you get things weighted negatively. You don't have enough parking, you don't have enough elevators, there's only windows on two of the sides, etc. But the bigger that gap is, the less likely the project is to work. So we started doing it. We tested a few buildings from the Gensler portfolio, and then midway through 2020, we were hired by the city of Calgary, who going into COVID had a 36% vacancy in their downtown. And they said, can you apply this to the whole city? We want to figure out how many housing units we could create and how much, importantly, how much office market they could get rid of. So that gave us a data set then of about 120 buildings. So we did that, got some really good results, helped them build an incentive program, which I'll show you. And then we got hired by San Francisco. Then we started picking up some developers. And now we've done 15 or just over 1,500 buildings. And we have a scale which allows us to start talking about how these buildings work, but also start influencing policy, which we've been doing across the US, and with the White House guidebook on conversions, which we put together for them last year. But it's that data approach that allows us to do one of these scorings. Instead of it being 6 months to get an answer, we can tell you in less than a day. So a couple of examples. This is one of the first buildings we did in Calgary. This building scores 89%. So anything above 80% is a pretty good candidate for conversion. It has enough of the positive factors. And you can see the score kind of broken down there. But when you look inside, it plans out kind of like a condo building. You've got good short quarter window depths, about 40 feet. We're getting really good unit sizes. And importantly, we're able to mix and match those units. So you can see, some studios, some 1 beds, some 2 beds on the corners. But there's a lot of flexibility there, and that's what's scoring the building higher. So we predicted in this we'd get about 250 units. When we did the final design, we ended up with 252 units, so we're pretty close on the prediction. And then we were able to use the embodied carbon analysis, and you definitely can't see, but I can see that it says there's 8.9 million kilograms of embodied carbon in the building. We're able to use that to get some federal incentives to fund actually a chunk of the repositioning at 2% interest rate. We're now working through doing that in the US with the Department of Energy, again, to show embodied carbon savings or the reuse of the building as a positive carbon benefit, which can then allow you to get a loan guarantee or lower rate funding. So by contrast, this building scored 69. You can see the 69 is red, bad score. And you can see why. When we started doing the design, we just did the design on this out of interest. If a building scores 69, we'll tell you to walk away, honestly. But you've got 52-foot deep units. They're oversized. The floor plate is only 77% efficient. So the algorithm is predicting this and saying, don't do it. Don't spend another dollar trying to make this project work. It's not going to happen. So what did that mean for cities? Well, Calgary, as I say, going into COVID, had 36% total vacancy, 33% kind of prime vacancy, and about 14 million square feet of empty building. So the city said, we want to cut that in half. We want to get to 6 million square feet. And it became a really easy calculation for us. Again, looking at a gap analysis and saying, well, if you want to get 7 million square feet, 7 million square feet off the books, this is how much money you're going to have to put in. These are the buildings that work. These are the ones that nearly work that you're going to have to fund. And believe it or not, we did the analysis. We looked at how much tax revenue they were going to get back over 5 years. We broke that down to what they wanted to achieve. And we said, you need to give developers $75 a square foot to make the projects happen. You'll make your money back in 5 years. That'll be great. And if you do that and you simplify the zoning procedures and approvals, you'll get the results you want. And within about 2 months of us saying that, and I honestly never expected to hear from them again, they had a $250 million program put together, $75 a square foot, you get the money, you get a letter of credit up front, you get the money on occupancy, that's it. Incredibly simple. It's literally, if you go on their website, it's 5 bullet points. Do you want $15 million? Yes. Cool. That's it. So we've been taking this to other cities all across North America, across the world actually. We presented this and took the people from Calgary, city of Calgary, to Chicago under the previous mayor. Said, make a simple program, make it effective, make it so developers like it. And they said, okay. And they put out a 198-page legal document about how you probably can't get any money anyway, but no one read it. So the kind of key to success, where we have had success in cities, is and with the government, is simple programs with enough money to actually make a difference and not a million hoops to jump through. So in Calgary, over the last just less than 2 years, they've had 12 buildings approved and under construction using the first batch of financing. They have another 5 which are approved, starting construction currently. And then they've just reopened the program with its third batch of funding to take on another 5 buildings. So far, they're way ahead of their 10-year goal of cutting the vacancy in half. And they've got 22 projects going. They've created an increase in housing in the downtown of about 23%. And they're well on their way to hitting about 2,500 units, small city. But 10% now of their office buildings, of the 120 office buildings, over 10% are getting converted, actively converted right now. And the other thing that's done is completely stabilize their vacancy. When COVID hit, every other city's vacancy went up 10, 15%. In Calgary's, because of the timing of the program, it just kind of flatlined. And it's actually now down 6%. It's basically the only city in North America that saw that kind of drop in the last quarter. And although the numbers are not good, 29% vacancy is still incredibly high, they didn't get worse and they're now getting better. So I'm going to, before I invite the panel up, I'm just going to show a couple of example projects at different ends of the scale. So this is 1 St. Clair West, which is a project we're doing in Toronto. 12-story office building, looks like a million other office buildings you'd have seen. But what we realized is it's built basically to the property line. You'd never be able to develop a building of this scale on that site in Toronto anymore. But it gave us an interesting opportunity. What if we took this and we converted it, but we used that building as the podium? Well, if we use it as the podium, then we can add more density on the top. So we actually went to the city. We got the building heritage protected, so they couldn't ask us to tear it down or change it too much, which is a bit of a neat trick. We redid the floor design. We expanded the building about 50 feet onto an adjacent lot as well. And then we said, what would be great? If we made it 37 stories taller. Yeah. So in Toronto, if you're going to do a podium and tower building, you actually have to set back by 20 feet on all sides. You have a limit on the floor plate size. But we said to them, well, this building's heritage. We can't set back. It'll ruin the structure. We want to keep the structure. We want to keep that embodied carbon in there. So we now have this approved 49-story building. And when we went and did the public presentation, and we showed them this image and said, isn't it beautiful on the ground floor? Don't worry about the height of the tower. The comments we got back from the local councillor and from the city residents was, could you guys do 55? Like, we kind of need the units. The answer is no, 55 will fall over because we're balancing it on top of an old building. But we figured out a structural approach here that kind of works, and wind tunnel tested for the 49 stories. But this is on the extreme end. We're not adding this much density to every site. Toronto is in a crazy building spree for our growing population. But we've taken this approach and used it on projects like Pearl House, which we just completed in New York, where we actually took the core out of the building and used that density to add 5 stories to the roof. So we're quite often just doing this kind of density shift, not to the, I don't know what your zoning rules are here if they'd allow you to do this, but Toronto, they love it. So here's a more simple project. This is Franklin Tower. We completed it a few years ago in Philadelphia. Now this one, as you can see, scored 76, which is not great. It had a few problems, especially around the core of the building. But it was 100% vacant. PMC got it for a good deal. And we reclad the building, completely changed it. To deal with some of that kind of larger quarter window depth, we pushed in balconies on the end just to shallow that up a little bit. Again, that small amount of density reduction by pushing the balconies in actually allowed us to do a little penthouse, which I'll show you in a second. But it is basically the exact same office building with a new skin. Now, the floor plan laid out pretty nicely on the what is the east and west, but the top and bottom of this drawing. But we really didn't know what to do with the washroom spaces that were in the middle and the mechanical spaces. So we took a different approach to amenities. The original design had one big amenity floor and took out about 24 units, which was not ideal. So we actually ended up distributing the amenities through the core of the building and creating individual spaces on each floor, which were little movie theaters or little gym areas, kids' playroom. And this has proved incredibly popular as an approach for these conversions. Take out that washroom space, put these amenities in, and the residents love it because too often they see these big amenity spaces which are a bit weird to use if there's just a couple of you. So a theater room that you can reasonably fill with your friends, rather than the theater room in the condo I used to live in, which had about 60 seats. Like, I don't have 60 friends. I'd much rather use this one. And people were a lot more comfortable working out in the space that was just 5 or 6 people rather than a big gym area. Kids' playrooms, incredibly popular. We actually went back and added some more of these in. They're right between the elevator banks. They're surrounded by about 2 feet of concrete on every side. You can have your kids screaming around in here while you're working in your unit, and no one will be disturbed by them. So we're actually doing this on a new project in Calgary now as well. And then we took advantage of what's good about these conversions, which is good natural light and incredibly high ceilings. The average office building, or even the worst office buildings, have 11-foot ceilings or floor to floor. We're building residential at like 9'6", 9'8" floor to floor. So these units now have just over 10-foot ceilings above the kitchens and nearly 11-foot ceilings above the living space. So it's top of market, and the rents are reflecting that in this project as well. And then the last one, believe it or not, this is the after image. And someone was showing me this, it's in a magazine today, but this is Rivermark Center, which is in Baton Rouge. The facade of this building was designed as the structure to prevent damage from hurricanes and tornadoes. So it's cast in place concrete facade. Absolutely brutal, very hard to do anything with. But when we scored it and we looked at the floor plate, it was really efficient. 88%, one of the best scores of any of the buildings we've looked at. So we figured we'd have to try and make it work. So we were able to add a few larger openings. You can see it's kind of sister building to the left. Doesn't have those, so we were able to add some openings, push some balconies in, and then create a really efficient floor plan. So if we designed a residential building with this kind of a floor plate efficiency, we'd be pretty happy. And this is on a conversion. So that's why it's starting to score well and getting good results. And then we actually kept Chase Bank, who is the tenant of the whole building, densified them onto the lower 5 floors, redid them a very kind of cost-effective upgrade on their lobby, and then did the residential lobbies to look a lot more soft and appealing. Spent a bit more money on them as well. But despite what it looks like on the outside, by pulling out the ceilings, exposing the cast-in-place structure, we got 14-foot ceilings, incredibly bright, even though the windows are limited. And then the trick of pulling the balconies in allowed us to do floor-to-ceiling glass facing onto the balconies, which, as you can see in these images, really floods the units with a lot of natural light. So this has been a huge success. This one and the one we just finished in New York leased up in about 3 months, I think. A couple of hundred units in here. But the balconies are pretty good. Get a great view of the Mississippi, and you can see just on the corner there where we cut part of the structure away to make it happen. So again, these corner units proved incredibly popular. And then for some reason, there's one slide missing, which was a beautiful view of the roof terrace with a pool. And that's it. Oh, there you go. Yeah, I don't know what that slide is then, but this one is good. Okay, so that's what I have to kind of show you today. I'll be hanging around afterwards to take questions, but I'd like to invite our panel on stage, and we're going to get into a bit more of a discussion about the local market here, and we'll kind of be around to take some questions at the end too. So we've got about 45 minutes for the panel discussion. I'm going to start just by going down the line and asking everyone to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about the projects you're working on, what you've seen in the adaptive reuse market, and why you're here. We'll start on this end. So Johnny, you're first.
Johnny Vasallo. How's everybody today? He did a great job, didn't he? It was amazing. Really great. I think I got invited just generally because of 100 East. But if you look back at the Posner building that we did back in 2017, and I was blessed to work with the Klein family, that building it turned into 105 units. It was falling down. It was worth nothing. And now it's a great contributor to the tax base. It's been 100% occupied for 7 straight years. We're getting good rate increases. We have 14-foot ceilings, a lot of the things that he talked about. But KBS, which is now C.D. Smith, did a fantastic job remodeling that. And now we're over to the 100 East building, which I want to run through his system. I want to see what the score is, but I bet it'll be in the 90s. So 100 East is
very few get into the 90s. You have to be basically.
I'll take that bet right now.
Yeah.
I'm taking wagers right now. I'm going to run it through. We'll get back to all of you. Tracy, can we send an email with the score of 100 East to everyone? Yes, thank you. So 100 East is a terrific building. It's historical in my mind, for sure, historically significant for anyone who's listening. It was the original trading post for Milwaukee. Then it was built into a 4-story building and then into about 11-story building. That was torn down in 81. The Historical Preservation Society was created basically to prevent that from ever happening again. And then Faison was forced to, if you look at the 2 buildings, to make this building look. So one, I think the building is absolutely beautiful. The deck heights are 14 feet. The floor plates are great. We have great elevator bank. The lobby is grand and beautiful. It would be the 3rd space that I would like you to come look at. Here are the Pfister in our lobby. And that's basically why we're after it. And we think with the right support from the city, and if we get historicals, it'll be a really good project, and we'll get it back on the tax rolls for at least what it was at or higher than it was before.
Perfect. John.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm John Searles with the Wisconsin Housing and Economic Development Authority. So I'm on the funding end of things, and one of the things that we're primarily working on today is getting $525 million out the door. So
He has it on him in cash if you want.
The Wisconsin state legislature took a really extraordinary step last year through a bipartisan measure, allocated those kinds of funds just to support workforce housing and infrastructure, and through a range of projects that we can support across the state. So what we've done with those funds is we've created 4 new housing and infrastructure products. There are 3 that are available today. One is to actually help convert the second and third story above a ground floor retail center or commercial space. So if you think about some of our smaller communities with on Main Street that have maybe a hardware store on the ground floor and some underutilized space above it, it's to put it back to more productive use. And then we have another product, it's our largest one, called Infrastructure Access Loan. That's $275 million that we're deploying to support things like water systems, extension of electric and gas distribution lines, all of the things that housing needs to be successful from an infrastructure perspective. And then probably most cogent to this conversation today is vacancy to vitality, which is a little bit of a spin.
Yeah.
And that one is to support things like office conversion. So I'm excited to talk to you about that today.
Thanks.
Hey everybody, I'm Rob Oldenburg with Ergens. Ergens is typically thought of a ground-up developer, but while we did cut our teeth primarily in the suburbs with office buildings, our first foray into downtown was a historic rehabilitation of the former Gimbel's department store in Plankinton in Wisconsin. It most recently had transitioned to a Marshall Field's department store right at the face of the Grand Avenue Mall. That closed in the late 90s, and Ergens bought that entire city block, which was composed of a number of different interconnected buildings that were constructed at different time periods, starting in the early 1900s, and ultimately transformed a really beautiful but blighted building into a really creative mixed-use development with a residence and hotel with a partner. The American Society for Quality bought a condominium unit that they put their corporate headquarters into. We had some additional office space and then some retail space along the river and Wisconsin Avenue, and just a really transformative adaptive reuse that's really, I think, kicked off kind of the modern era of the downtown as we think about it. And then most recently, we currently own the former M&I Bank headquarters at 770 North Water Street. As part of the construction of the new BMO Tower, we acquired the legacy M&I Bank headquarters. And I was going to say, if we ran it through Steven's model, I'd say 80 to 90. 40? We'll go with about an 80.
I'm going to get stuck in the middle of a terrible competition here.
We're about a block away, Steven, so they're very close. But that building it's a rectangular footprint. It has an 80-foot depth, which works. It's a little bit deep for hospitality, but it works for multifamily. It's a little bit too shallow for office space. Elevatoring is great. You can split the building into two distinct uses at the 11th floor. So we really think it's a dynamic upcoming opportunity that we're continuing to evaluate and hope to bring on soon.
Good afternoon, or yeah, I guess it's afternoon already. SR Mills with Bear Real Estate Group. Appreciate being here today. Really enjoyed Stephen's presentation too. The last building was in Baton Rouge. Actually looked at a while ago, and it's pretty remarkable with what they did. So we're a vertically integrated real estate shop with construction, asset management, and development. We do a variety of different things. We do complete a lot of adaptive reuse, whether that's using historic credits, working with our friends at WIDA on other grants and loan programs. But really, we're somewhat opportunistic as well. We buy, when we feel the timing's right. I think our first adaptive reuse project in Milwaukee was 700 West Michigan, which was two buildings kind of cobbled together. One was built in 1920, the other 1955, and turned it into 49 units. That was about 15 years ago. Since then, we've done quite a bit in Milwaukee. We have quite a bit more to do. We've also had some experiences where we thought we were going to do adaptive reuse, and it just doesn't work. Recently broke ground on 576 units of new construction because the existing 284,000 square feet of industrial there just didn't pencil out anymore. So we fully appreciate that you can have a real good thought going into something, but sometimes you have to pivot too. So I think we need to run a few more through his program to get our scores on the front end. But no, I appreciate being here today and look forward to discussing everything.
Thanks. And I just kind of wanted to start with a little bit of background. So, whenever we're looking at cities and projects in cities, we look at what's happening. So I'm sure a lot of you guys already know this, but the vacancy rate here stands at just over 15%, the availability just over 20%. Those numbers are both 5 to 6% better than the national average, 10% better than Chicago, which I'm sure is a nice nice thing. Milwaukee also ranks, according to CBRE data, 4th worst in the country for new starts, with only about 35,000 square feet of new office, and 4th lowest in the country for office workers versus non-office workers. Do you think, we'll go down the line very quickly, but do you think that's actually helping the city at this point? Less new inventory coming on is helping to prop up the vacancy a little bit, and generally being less reliant on office work is probably helping the market in the same way. So just like 30 seconds, how do you feel about where the market is right now and what's going to happen in the next couple of years?
I just think that the adaptive reuses not only help the building that you're working in, but also fill the other space, right? People have to move like out 100 East and they're going into other spaces. So it's a double benefit. And I think that I believe people are going to go back to work over time, and hopefully Ergens will get to build a bunch of brand new buildings.
Yeah, I agree with Johnny. And just from a demand perspective, what we see in Milwaukee County is demand for housing for people at all income levels. So, when we take a look at things like market fundamentals, market studies that support some of the proposals for housing that we see, Milwaukee County looks very strong. So we're very supportive of housing for people that we're able to support, which is up to middle income folks here.
Yeah, Milwaukee takes a very measured approach to office space. But outside maybe the U.S. Bank Center, the kind of the trophy assets downtown have had very checkered financial histories. In the last 20 years, I think there have been 5 or 6 new construction office buildings added to the Class A market. I think the average size of those is about 250,000 square feet. All of which had substantial pre-leasing. And so I think through lessons learned from our forefathers, I think the development community has caught up and is really taking a more of a conservative approach and just being realistic with what this market can absorb. And I think that absolutely doesn't rescue those 1960s vintage buildings from need to be reused or rehabilitated for a different purpose, but it does, limit the sheer quantity and the scale, frankly, that we're talking about today.
Yeah, I think we're talking about both office and residential, at least from a residential standpoint with the supply and demand metrics. I think it was last year, it was Milwaukee and Miami were tied for the most rent growth on the residential side. And I think many in the business community were thinking that's a good thing, but I think to the point that we brought so few units on in Milwaukee, it's actually a really, really bad thing, because it shows that we've got some real supply and demand metric issues, and we need to try and solve that with more supply.
Yeah, and the supply issue is an obvious one. John, you're looking at how much housing is needed and who needs it. If you could turn the tap on today, how many units would you want the city to produce over the next couple of years?
So statewide, we need a city the size of Green Bay in one of its suburbs.
Okay.
So it's 120,000 units of affordable housing, which is where WIDA plays. So that's 120,000 units for people earning at 100% of county median income or below. So I believe here in Milwaukee County, that's about low 60s is the average income. So, and then higher than that, when you include market rate, according to the Wisconsin Counties Association, that's 277,000 units that we need statewide, a good chunk of those here in the Milwaukee Metro.
Yeah.
If we want full participation and to be able to attract more workers and retain more workers here in the city. So it's a staggering number.
Yeah, interestingly, it's getting close to the numbers that Toronto requires, and we're a huge city of nearly 10 million people. So it's definitely driving demand. Johnny, with those numbers, are you seeing real confidence in the residential market and the ability to actually execute, knowing that there's always going to be residents there in need once you've built product?
Yeah, I think that the need is here. Currently, under the current interest rates, I don't think anything pencils out without help. So that's an issue. Construction costs are probably 20% less in Houston. We build in Houston also. So there are some things working. Houston construction costs are down about 14% for apartments versus last year. I don't think that's hit here yet. And so I think the demand is absolutely here. Houston grows at about 100,000 people a year, and rents are more expensive in Milwaukee than they are in Houston. And there are reasons we could talk hours about for that increased cost.
So you mentioned interest rates. We were debating earlier whether it's 0.25% or 0.5% or whatever.
I'm on bended knee tonight.
How much of a difference do you think that will make? I mean, construction lending costs have got a little divorced from federal rates recently because of the risk profile. Do you think that half a percent? Let's pretend it's 0.5%. Do you think that's going to make a genuine difference to the amount of supply that will be able to come into the market?
Not immediately, but for the bankers out there, right? We all believe that it's not going to keep going up now, right? So we're just seeing things level off. The fear of it going to 10% is kind of gone, and so we saw a loan yesterday for a commercial building that we're doing at 607 for a 2-year loan. I haven't seen SR gets great rates, but for me, a 6% rate, I haven't seen that in 3 years. So it's very exciting. Where's Waterstone? Where are you? They gave us a great rate on 100 East, the great bank.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen some construction projects with 12%, which I'm debating whether or not to say this. We've been calling it the fuck off rate. Yeah, we'll give you the loan, but don't ever talk to us again. But I'm from England, by the way, and we all swear all the time, and then I come to yeah. Sorry, put myself right off. When you look at these buildings and you're doing some quite large conversions, what do you think it was about the existing office buildings that made them no longer viable as an office?
Ergen's making a great offer to the main tenant in the building.
Wow, this really is a competition.
Well, I think, yes, Ergen says it makes great flexible offers, 100%. But Johnny acquired it, from a previous owner who was an out-of-town REIT and bought 100 East as part of a larger portfolio. Had kind of teased that they were going to invest into it, and they just didn't. So part of it too is just a lack of investment from previous owners.
Yeah. SR, I think I'm right in saying you recently picked up the Johnson Controls complex. It's not really just a building. It seems you managed to get that for below replacement cost with them still there for the next 2 years. As you kind of look through that building, what's helped you decide which buildings to keep, which to change, what to convert to residential, and what to stay or upgrade as office?
Yeah, I mean it's complicated. Most deals, a lot of the floor plates that you were showing, I was thinking about the Johnson Control building. Well, it had 7 different buildings, so we have 7 different floor plates, but they're all interconnected. But I think that also presents some of the opportunities. Certainly, we acquired it well below replacement cost. But with that said, it had to check a lot of boxes for us that we can get the historic credits, both state and federal. It's a certain QCT. We needed to line up enough of the financing mechanisms that gave us the opportunity to decide, do we want to keep 200,000 square feet of it as office, reimagine that space, but then figure out what to do with the 230,000 square feet that maybe isn't as adaptive, but we think there are some creative ways to make that work for other uses, residential certainly being one of them.
As you're looking at purchases like that, is that analysis you're doing up front? Like how far down the line are you by the time you made a decision of what works financially for you?
Yeah, it's certainly all deal dependent. So we do a lot of workforce housing around the country, typically with workforce housing tax credits. Those deals usually, there's some reasons to this that you don't want to acquire it before you go in for the credits, you lose basis, et cetera. But on those kinds of deals, there's a lot of thought, a lot of analysis. We line up equity, debt, et cetera. On more of the opportunistic stuff that we're doing, JCI and others, it has to check enough of the boxes that we think we can't get hurt, but we don't have the full plan fully vetted. And some of that is just the nature of the business that we're in. If we're buying paper from banks or some other party that's didn't do so well on it, that's typically allows us to be in a decent position.
Yeah, and we've seen that a lot recently with people taking a little more of a risk because the values are so low. A client in Calgary bought a building essentially sight unseen, only to find out that all the precast was failing on the outside. So, yeah, I mean, there is certainly opportunity there, but it does still come with risks.
Risk too.
Yeah. We've talked a little bit about some downtown buildings, but Rob, you've been developing stuff and repositioning stuff in the suburbs as well. It seems like a bit of an interesting market here where actually the suburbs are suffering from vacancy in a greater way than the downtown. So what's kind of affecting your decisions on what you do with those buildings? And is there a variation between what you can achieve in a suburban office building versus down here?
So we're talking about office buildings today, but 15 years ago, office buildings are pretty good investments. And as Kevin alluded to in his opening remarks, with the emergence of e-commerce and the fallout from the Great Recession, we were talking about retail, and we were able to identify a number of opportunities out in the suburbs for conversions from retail to specifically to medical. And that included a hardware store, a furniture store, a pharmacy, and some are single tenant, some are multi-tenant. Obviously, the retail typically has the parking to make that work. Now, if you're talking about the office building today in the suburbs that doesn't work, it's typically some type of a combination of location issues, parking issues, and some functional obsolescence. There's probably nothing that's going to save these buildings, and we're looking at some opportunities today that we would not have looked at 3 to 4 years ago. I think that construction pricing finally has stabilized. There's still some volatility, but we think it's generally stabilized, but it's still 40 to 50% higher than it was in even 2020, even early 2021. It is really hard to pencil any deal, even on a greenfield site of any product type. And so I think we're finally at the point where we're going to see some of these kind of antiquated 60s, 70s, 80s vintage office buildings be converted. And we have not seen it done to multifamily yet. We did see a hotel out at Mayfair Mall, but I think there's going to be some opportunities, and Ergens is amongst the groups that are looking to see if that's going to be a viable solution going forward.
Across a lot of the other cities we work in, we're actually seeing the suburban market tend towards densification, building on the vast parking lots, trying to surround the often retail malls with more residential, with more of a mixed use to create basically a customer base for those buildings. Is that something that's happening here as well? Is that kind of density play started to pan out, to intensify those sites?
Yeah, 100%. The name of the game is parking efficiency, and if you can co-locate uses that have synergies with parking, 100%. And you see that at the malls. We recently did that for a larger corporate headquarters campus out at the research park, where we added some parking, but then ultimately created some outlots for retail, medical, and a future multifamily project that have shared parking with some synergistic uses. So yeah, we have seen, especially in the more desirable kind of inner ring suburbs, we're absolutely seeing a densification push.
Yeah, and you mentioned parking efficiency there. One of the things I didn't say when I showed that the 49-story building we're doing in Toronto is it has 18 parking spaces for 450 units, which is considered generous in Toronto. You don't want to know. I mean, the rent in Toronto is kind of going the way of New York. Very similar cities, but the downtown ones you're doing, Johnny and SR, when you start to look at those buildings, you mentioned before you'd bought parking decks, like how does the parking play into that? Because it varies so wildly in the different cities that we've been working in, from none for 500 units to 2 per unit that we're doing in some of the Calgary work. So what's the status of that market here?
The Posner building had no parking, but we did convert the basement to 40 parking spaces, which that was very creative by the Kleins. And then we had the city structure next door, so that's worked out well. And then the 100 East, also because I think our score is going to be so good, has 750 parking spaces that was associated with it. So had ample parking, and I think you can get that in a lot of office structures, and that I'm sure is part of your scoring.
Yeah, absolutely.
And comparable, I think typically we've always been pushed to overpark many of the developments when we look at the parking lots that are available, the parking fields, that there's plenty of opportunity for shared parking. With that said, it's also in a renter's or buyer's mindset that they need to have parking right there. So for us, at least at like the Johnson Control Building, we have 500 stalls in a leased lot a block away. Now, where that factors in is, do we think high-end luxury housing, are we able to do that and then expect a tenant to walk a block? We don't. So somewhat that dictates the kind of housing that we're going to put there. If it's a AMI restricted, we think then it's a possibility to have a parking deck a block away and still get that to work. So that all factors in to what our end product looks like.
Do you find that factoring in on the cost and rent significantly as well? I mean, one of the reasons developers in Toronto pushed for zero parking requirements is it was more expensive to build a parking space than they were able to sell it for. And we had 400 square foot units with 250 square foot parking stalls. It was kind of insane. So in the lower AMI projects, are you starting to see that kind of actually becoming a factor that's affecting rent and affordability?
Yeah, it certainly does. And whether it's in basis or not in basis, when you're dealing with the workforce housing side, it factors in. But we want to make sure we always have enough parking stalls to be able to let people live the way they want to live, but we also don't want to be overparked because we know it is such a burden. So we think we're at a pretty good spot. We work in some resort markets that absolutely no parking, and we have to fight for parking there. And but we can also charge $200,000 a stall, so it's a little different. So it's each market's different.
John, we've talked a little bit about some of the programs for affordability, but there's always questions about the hoops people have to jump through. We were talking before about what you can combine between historic tax credits and programs from the state and city. Could you expand on that a little bit? Like, what to you right now is the best approach? What's the best combination of different programs? And is there any that you see on the horizon which are actually going to really help get inventory moving? Yeah,
so I'll answer as it kind of relates to adaptive reuse projects, which is, really could be office, it could be other commercial property types. In terms of the barriers with some of the new funding that we have, developers right now are having to make a trade-off between incorporating things like active TIF funds into a project or a subordinate loan from WIDA to support the project. And some of them do the math and WIDA is their choice. Sometimes they do the math and TIF is their choice. Another barrier would be the inability to use historic tax credits with something like vacancy to vitality. In every case, the municipality in which the project is located has to have updated their comprehensive plan and the housing element of it within 5 years for the housing element or 10 years for the comp plan overall. So why would a developer kind of go through this process to see if their project qualifies? And it's largely due to the rates that we're able to offer right now. So generally for our subordinate loan, the rate is 3%. If a developer is doing an all seniors project, that rate is 1%. In any community of 10,000 people or less, it's also 1%. So that kind of lower interest rate allows them to lower rents to serve more workforce housing, which we're defining for renters would be 100% of AMI, but the product can also be used for single family development as well. So it could, as long as the development can sustain at least 16 units or more post-conversion, it's 140% of CMI. So I think it's Milwaukee County high 80s. And anecdotally, we hear that there's a lot of demand for condos as well. So we can support condominiums for sale in addition to rental housing.
John, sorry, I'll go to SR first, and we'll come back.
I want to expand on maybe what John can't say, but I can, frankly, from a WIDA perspective. And WIDA is not to blame for this. It's some of, myself included, the architects of some of this legislation that was passed. So last year we did a great job, got bipartisan support for approximately $500 million worth of funding to go towards workforce housing. The problem is the way some of the nuances are written, it's just not, you just can't use it. You can't use it with any volume, and you can't get it out the door. So it's not doing anybody any good, specifically WIDA, because of some of these restrictions. As he articulated, you can't couple it with historic credits. You can't couple it with TIF. There's debt coverage ratio items on it where it's either it's not you're adding subordinate debt, you either have to reduce your first. And so there's some nuances there. So I guess reason I bring it up is because all of you are influential in the communities that you work in, the legislators. We really need to fix this because there's $500 million sitting there that's supposed to solve some of these problems that we have. And we need to be able to really do the bidding of the legislature and the governor, who all did a great job to get it there. Now we just got to refine it so we can get it out the door quicker. And
thanks, SR.
So we are on the same side as this. And again, we just, we're going to try and push some stuff through here. Again, we've on both sides of the aisle are very supportive of these measures, but we will need assistance. And we know all of you are involved in the political side of this, whether we want to be or not. But we all have some relationships that we can lean on. So.
Yeah, and I just want to reinforce that. I mean, the work we did with the White House last year, we unlocked, in theory, $350 billion worth of Inflation Reduction Act money, and allowed Department of Energy and Department of Transportation to then lend that money for housing creation. It is almost impossible to get it right now.
We're going through one of those right now. It is almost impossible.
Yeah, and it's a real challenge because the political win has been had, but nothing's really happening. So, the kind of follow-up question, I saw you trying to do the maths on your project in your head then about whether it was a good idea. I've seen developers willing to look at federal and state money way more in the last couple of years than ever before. Do you see that it's going to continue, or if rates go down tomorrow, is the interest in kind of that kind of incentive going to start to dissipate?
I think it'll continue for next 2 years. I think that rates aren't going to catch up to where you need to be for if we get back down. I think Fed wants to get down like a 2.8 Fed rate. So if we get there, but in the meantime, I mean, Posner would have never got done without historical TIF and WIDA. So it would never happen. It couldn't happen. It was cheaper to tear the building down and just start over. Literally, can you imagine? Like literally tearing the building down and starting over was cheaper than doing what we did. But every time I look at the building, I'm really proud of the fact that that beautiful building's still there. So there is a need for it. There's a use for it. We looked at IRA, and it doesn't work with anything we're doing. Like if you look on the face of it, we can get $7 million. When you really start matching it up with, if you do this or that, that goes away, that goes away, that goes away. And so it's zero. So it sounds great, but when you really do the homework, it's not available. And it sounds like WIDA may be in the same spot.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to workforce housing or affordable housing, there has to be some kind of federal or state subsidy in order to lower rents. The private market alone just can't, when you look at construction costs and development costs, I mean, you have to have a federal subsidy. So we have an insatiable demand for our legacy product, the low-income housing tax credit, which, as you all probably know, is the largest provider of affordable housing, not just in Wisconsin, but nationwide. And we see about twice as many applications as we have funding available for that particular program. So it's way oversubscribed. And I think that demand will definitely continue.
Yeah, for sure. And we're still working to get some of the federal stuff moving. It's just I'm actually going to DC on right at the end of October, which is going to be the most interesting time to be down there trying to negotiate some new policy. We got kind of just under 10 minutes left, so I wanted to move on to some of the other questions, which I'm just trying to read now. I want to kind of ask all of you, I guess, most of you work in other cities. We were talking about Phoenix and Houston and so on. What are you seeing in other cities or other states that you really think should be brought here, to put the political pressure on, as SR said earlier, or just to really help unlock things and get some projects moving? I'll go down the line again, but I'm going to start the far end this time.
Sure. I think some consistency. We've had discussions with Milwaukee elected officials and administration, as we have in other municipalities. But as we think about TIF policy, there's a great TIF policy on the books for the city of Milwaukee. We know what it is. We understand it. We can build our projects around it, knowing it's going to be part of the capital stack. That's really the only stated TIF policy that's out there right now. So when we go and look at a development, we can't bank on will there be TIF, will there not be TIF? If the political winds change, maybe it goes away. So it's very tough from the development side to be able to take on ambitious projects, like as Johnny mentioned, like the Posner building. You can't do that if you don't know what's going to be there, and you can't take that kind of risk. So I do think that there's a lot of great examples, New York, Chicago, Toronto, Calgary, where they have some stated policy, not that you can't deviate from it, but TIF's really the only tool in the toolbox we have in the state of Wisconsin for assisting developments to actually happen. And I think all communities, Milwaukee certainly included, if we can create some standard policy, it's going to do us all well in the future.
And that's a really good point, and something you haven't touched on is that confidence of I need to know that by the time this project breaks ground, there's going to be money there. Do you see that happening at a state level, or is that something where federal policy could create a more kind of national standard that would actually give you the confidence to not just work here, but kind of work more nationally as well?
I mean, I think it depends on the program. As we talk about tax incremental financing, that's really a state, or it's not a state, it's a county, and then the individual municipality. So it needs to be decisions made by those municipalities. But certainly there's a lot of federal funding, whether it's federal tax credits, with a state tax credit component, federal historics. They're consistent. We know what they are. We know what the rule book says, so we count on them. Similar to 221D4 HUD financing. There's all of those programs that brings that consistency. So anytime we can have that consistency, it's going to help the development community do more deals.
Rob.
Yes, so we do have a Phoenix office. The product out there is quite a bit different. So really Milwaukee is our focus for project of this scale and complexities. And I 100% agree with SR. You just don't know with TIF, and it can take months and months of discussions. There's not enough transparency, and that's not just the city of Milwaukee too, that's some of the suburbs as well. So there needs to be more of a standardized, transparent approach. These projects need TIF. We've heard about historic tax credits and LIHTC and IRA and all the acronyms out here. Developers approach these projects really wanting to do them the right way and execute them the right way. And the reality is it depends on your basis, and what type of support you can get is ultimately the formula for what the end product looks like. And there's a ton of risk. We work really hard, and you really need TIF at the end of the day, and you need to be able to know up front what you can expect.
Yeah, and that I'm going to change the question slightly for you, John. You mentioned the months of negotiation with TIF to get the money and so on. The projects we're doing in Calgary right now, they have a 6-week approvals process for the money. Yeah, 5 bullet points. The project I showed in Toronto, it took us 2.5 years to get that approved, despite the city saying they want more housing. What does the approvals process look like with WIDA? Are you quick? I know this is a harsh question, but what does that look like, and how quickly can developers get that done?
So I love that question because it's really timely. We're about to open the application cycle for our new products maybe as early as next week, and the applications will be due at the end of October. Our approach has been to simplify the applications as much as possible, because if you think about like the owners of like mom and pop stores downtown that want to develop housing above their unit, they're just not as, they just don't have the experience that folks on this stage do. So it's a checklist, and if they kind of check all the boxes literally, they'll have pretty great certainty of execution with us. And then the approval will come 6 to 8 weeks at the most after submitting the application. So that's with our new subordinate loan products.
Great. I'm glad I asked that question. You didn't turn around and be like, well, 18 months. And so, Johnny, what do you see in the other cities you're working in, and what could we be bringing here to change the results a little bit?
Yes, all my developments, I have this sleepless night theory. So how many sleepless nights am I going to have per project? Because they're out there. If you've been a developer, worked with developers, you're bankers, right? So how many sleepless nights? So, we could really use TIF for 100 East. We've worked really hard at trying to figure that out. And there's always reasons and conversations of how that could happen. So I think the challenge is alignment, direction, need, and then migration, right? So are we aligned? What is the vision? So Mayor Cavalier Johnson wants to have 1 million people living here, which would be amazing. Well, then we have to start that to create the migration for the people to want to come here. So do we have a need? We absolutely have a need, right? We're, at least in my opinion, city of Milwaukee, 10 to 15,000 apartments short. So in this environmental situation, how can we do that? How can we get it faster? Is it going to be years? And is it going to be, how many conversations do you have to have? What is the policy? Is there a policy? And so in other communities, and we're migrating to communities that, Cobalt just did a deal in Kenosha, which was a remarkable deal, right? So people, I think, are migrating to that. West Allis, Greenfield, there's communities here that are getting those units.
It's, it's an interesting point. We've got 3 minutes left. I think I'm going to go just down the line again, starting at your end. I just using the percentage scoring metric. How confident are you guys in the market for this, coming 2-3 years, especially as we go through an election cycle, as we see policies change? Do you think there'll be a genuine uptick? And how confident are you?
In the office or residential?
Actually, let's do both. Let's give a score for each. And I'm putting you on the spot, but
No, that's fine. I mean, I think downtown office, I'm actually more bullish than I am in the suburban office side. So I don't know, 75, I'd say. I think there are some deals out there. We're seeing it. You got to have the right product on the residential side, especially at the workforce rates. The demand's insatiable. So if you can figure out a project and get it to pencil, you should be able to fill it.
Amazon announced yesterday that they're requiring all their employees to come back 5 days a week, I think starting in January. Regardless of what their motives were to do that, I think that you're going to start to see the dominoes fall. I think we're going to see more corporations make that similar announcement, and they just didn't want to be the first ones to do it. So I think that office is going to rebound. Certainly, there's going to continue to be a flight to quality, and the best buildings in any market are going to be the best. But I think, truly believe that there's. I'm very bullish on Milwaukee as far as these conversion opportunities, both downtown and the suburbs. I think with interest rates, I think tomorrow is the first step, and then I think if we continue to see those trending down, I think towards the end of 2025, I think these rehab projects are going to make a lot more financial sense.
We almost got through the whole day without saying flight to quality. John?
Simply put, residential, I'd say, is 100 for a number of reasons. But also, I think after the election, I know a lot of players in DC and nationwide are looking to expand and strengthen the housing tax credit. And that could be a meaningful way to advance more of these adaptive reuse projects. And we've done office conversions here in the state using the tax credit. And I'm very bullish on it.
I'm very bullish on residential need here. I think if we can get enough people to move here, young professionals, I think that's what's created a lot of the renaissance of downtown Milwaukee. So I think if we can get the people here, then I would be very bullish on even new office, because people will relocate their headquarters here if the workers are here. This is the hardest thing to find, right? So.
Okay. Well, just wanted to thank you all very much. I think we are right on time, so we'll end it there.
Thank you.